Diablo IV is an action role-playing game developed and published by Activision Blizzard. It is the 5th game in the series if you count Diablo Immortal. Diablo, as a franchise, played a big role in a lot of people's entry into PC games, including myself with Diablo II. The main draw to the game for me being its eerie atmosphere and enjoyable gameplay, especially the way the loot drops work, and with Diablo 3, Blizzard realized just how much the loot system in Diablo worked in their favor. The idea of just one more, endlessly searching for that one item to finish your build, and then the final payoff of getting said item. This system is incredibly addictive, and Blizzard has definitely gone too far with it in the case of Diablo Immortal. I'm going to be spoiling the general plot for Diablo 4, so this is your spoiler warning. 3, 2, 1, okay. Diablo 4 begins with a cutscene of a group of men being chased by a horde of demons in an underground structure underneath a chapel. One of the group sacrifices themselves to allow the other 3 to get into some kind of vault. Inside this vault, the priest realizes that there is no treasure, and the disembodied voice of the 4th man tells them it is a gate, and reveals that he is not dead, and seemingly cannot be killed. The 4th man then convinces this priest to speak the incantation to sacrifice himself and the other 2 men to summon Lilith. We then create our character and get a scene of our character riding horseback through Snowy Mountain, and have a narrator giving a little background to Sanctuary, the world this game takes place in. The key takeaway being that Sanctuary was created as a refuge from the war between heaven and hell. A group called the Haradrim once kept the mortals safe, but is not as powerful as it once was, and that the creators of Sanctuary have returned. Our character continues to travel, something spooks our horse, it runs off, and is killed by something in the forest. We continue on foot, eventually passing out in a cave. A wolf with an exposed skull comes to scare us awake, and it is unclear if the dog is in our dream or real. We travel to a nearby town, finding 2 people trying to take care of a madman speaking of demons in ruins. The townspeople ask us to travel to the ruins and clear it of demons. We do that. Back in town, the townspeople drug us and move our unconscious body to a shed. While being dragged, we see Rathma's prophecy on screen. In the shed, we're fed blood petals made from Lilith's blood, making us blessed. We're saved by the madman from earlier, who was also drugged like us. We go to the chapel and we see a vision of a priest chastising his congregation. Lilith then appears in the church, claiming that the Lords of Hell are coming, and claims that she is here to help humans save Sanctuary. The villagers then murder the priest. Lilith then commands the man from the opening cutscene to travel to the dry steppes. The vision ends there and we wake up. The monk, Eoseph, tells us to go meet a hermit. We travel there and meet Lorath Na. If you play Diablo 3, you may recognize him from the Reaper of Souls expansion. He explains that we were fed the blood of Lilith, daughter of hatred, mother of Sanctuary, that she is one of the creators of Sanctuary and has her own plans for Sanctuary, outside of the eternal war between heaven and hell. We then travel to Kyovashad, the main city for this part of the world. Lorath travels to the dry steppes to find out who the man helping Lilith is, and tells us that we should go to the church. We have access to both Acts 1 and 2 here. I chose to go in chronological order. We go to the church that follows Anarius and meet Mother Prava, who sends us to a mine where Lilith was spotted. We arrive at the mine, meeting Vigo and a young girl named Nyrelle in a cutscene. We learn that Nyrelle and her mother study the Haradrim, and that she is trapped inside the mine with Lilith, along with some other knights and priests from the church. We travel deeper into the mine and eventually find a door with a statue of Lilith next to it. Upon opening the door, we find the group of knights and priests slain. One who barely survived tells us that Vanard, Nyrelle's mother, begged for Lilith to spare her life and was spared, and went deeper in with Lilith. We find blood petals that give us visions of Vanard and Lilith's interactions, where Vanard eventually becomes a servant of Lilith. We find Vanard. She believes we're going to steal the knowledge and tries to kill us. We fight her. We learn that we need a blessing to pursue Lilith, and after returning to the Cathedral of Light, Eoseph tells us to find Mother Prava at Korvalar, which is where we can get the blessing. We can now either go do that, or go with Nyrelle to a Haradrim vault. It doesn't seem to matter which you do first. If we go to the Haradrim vault, we end up stuck in an illusion. Our wolf friend from the start of the game appears and tells us that's what it is, and tries to help us out. He has an ominous red portal which takes us to a vision of Tristram. I'm sure this dog wants nothing but the best for us. When we ask who the wolf is and why they're helping us, they are vague, dodge the question, and say they just want to help us stop Lilith. Wow, it sure does look like hell in here. Anyway, I guess we'll just Go back to the vault and pretend like that didn't happen. We find a book about Rathma and bring it back to Nyrelle. She seems intrigued. My character, the Necromancer, says,
"Are you sure this is a good idea?"
And then when Nyrelle suggests that we use necromancy to solve our problem, my character, the Necromancer, is worried about it. I literally have skeletons running around doing my bidding, and when we're investigating the first Necromancer, Rathma, why isn't my character even a little bit excited or on board with doing necromancy? If it was one of the other classes, sure, but seriously? I want to take a quick break from the story to talk about this for a moment. In Diablo IV, it feels like they want us to be more engaged in the story than in the previous games, where the basic premise was, oh no, Diablo, go kill demons until you find him, with some cool lore cutscenes around it. But now we have a character trying to care about other characters. We have dialogue choices and a lot more in-game cutscenes with our character there. But then they don't give us any real engagement in the story. We're still just watching while decisions get made for us. Our only real agency in the story is go here, kill demons, which is fine. That's the best part about Diablo. Arguably, it's the main selling point. And then they layer on some good atmosphere and decent lore, especially in Diablo 1 and 2. I just don't think it feels good to be playing a Necromancer and to be the part of the game where we are trying to get into Rathma's sanctum and he barely shows any sign of interest. Anyway, back to the story. Before we can continue on, we need to go to Corvalar. We have to cleanse ourselves before we can get a blessing. We do that. And then we get to meet Inarius. He's a dick. He acts like we can't do anything and that he'll be the one to kill Lilith. Also, there are a lot of statues of himself in the place that he lives. We go back to Prava, we get some optional dialogue where she talks about the prophecy, the version Inarius tells, so it's about him winning. So, we go back to that underground temple and get ready to cross the lake. We do some necromancy, which my character, the Necromancer, doesn't help with at all. He literally just stands there and watches. We use our blood to open the way and continue on. Funnily enough, the comment about "this place feels like home" by the Necromancer may actually be one of the few things he says relating to the fact that he is a Necromancer in the Necromancer's place, since the other classes make different comments when entering. We travel into Rathma's sanctum and get some exposition by visions of Rathma, who tells us about his prophecy and how it's unfolding as he saw. At some point, we fight a boss and are helped by a huge knight thing that turns out to be Vigo, the knight from earlier at the mine, in a blood mech. Literally a mech powered by bleeding Vigo. So yeah, the Cathedral of Light are definitely the good guys and we should continue working with them and helping them. Inarius wants what's best for Sanctuary and Lilith will doom us. We go a little further and see a vision of the aftermath of Inarius killing Rathma, his own son. Lilith is upset, her son is dead, killed by his father. She also takes the key to Hell from his staff. This is the end of Act 1, and now we can move on to Act 2 in Skosglen. We travel to Skosglen and meet Donan, an ex-Haradrim whose son wants to go out into the field as a knight. We're told to investigate an incident that happened at his estate. There we see a vision of Lilith confronting Donan and asking him about an Astaroth. When we get out of the vision, the estate is under attack. Donan realizes that Lilith will go and talk to the companions he had when they slew Astaroth, so we follow in her footsteps. Donan's son has helped us to find out that one of the druids, Arida, has allied herself with Lilith, which at this point, I'm not surprised. The Cathedral of Light is burning people at the stake for not kissing Inarius' feet and putting people in blood mechs. So we kill her and move on to the next druid. A friendly dog comes to guide us to Nafane, the other druid, who we eventually find in a situation. He tells us to go north where we find a blood dog. We fight it, it responds to a call from Lilith. We go back to Nafane, who tells us he made a deal with Lilith to destroy the Knight's Penitent. And in exchange, he told Lilith where Astaroth is hidden. We go back to the keep and find that the entire place has been ransacked by demons. We find Donan, who tells us that he actually sealed Astaroth in a soulstone, because that always ends well. Going deeper into the keep, we find out that Donan's son's group has been attacked and we can't find Donan's son. We see another vision of Lilith, where she makes a deal with Astaroth for safe passage in a place she is no longer welcome, presumably Hell. Lilith has Yoren there. Astaroth accepts, and Lilith stabs the soulstone into Yoren, which lets Astaroth possess him. We chase them down and fight Astaroth, which ends in us sending Astaroth back to Hell and Yoren's death, ending Act 2. Now we travel to the Dry Steppes to finally meet up with Lorath. We find Lorath hungover sleeping in a stable. After waking him up, we find out that the Pale Man helping Lilith is an ex-Haradrim gone rogue named Elias. He was once Lorith's apprentice. We kill some demons for a while and find out that Elias wants to summon a lesser evil. Lorith pulls some stuff out of a demon's stomach, and we go to Gulran, a city overtaken by cannibals and demons under orders of Lilith and Elias. We're asked by a nearby NPC to rescue someone from inside the city. We do that. She tells us a path into the palace of the city. When we get there, we overhear a cultist telling one of the cannibals that Elias is planning to summon Andariel. We travel deeper into the palace and find a study of Elias's, which we search for clues as to where he's going to summon Andariel. We figure out that we need to go to Mount Sivo, the Temple of the Primes. Here we visit the shrines to the Prime Evils, but when we get to Mephisto's, a portal opens. And here we meet our skull dog friend from earlier, and we realize that this dog is Mephisto. And for some reason we don't immediately tell him to go away. He gives us his blessing and tells us to destroy Lilith. We find our way into the Temple of the Primes, kill some demons, and then find Elias performing a ritual to summon Andariel. And for some reason, Lorith tells us to stay to the shadows while he does everything. Somehow, Lorith gets past everyone else in the room and stabs Elias, who disappears. Lorith rescues the sacrifice, who I assume is supposed to be the vessel for Andariel, and we fight a boss. Thaisa, the sacrifice, tells us that Elias has a sanctum in the desert of Kyrgyzstan, so that's where we head next. We find out that we need a guide through the desert and end up finding Mashiv, a character from the second game. He guides us through the desert, which honestly feels like it takes too long and is just kind of annoying to do. We take constant damage in the sandstorm and keep needing to stop at rest points, and it just takes too long. It's boring, especially once the map is revealed and shows that we just took an unnecessarily long route. I get what they're trying to do. Mashiv is portrayed as if he's lost his mind. He keeps calling Lorath Decad, even after being told Decad is dead. And honestly, it feels ham-fisted. This whole sequence would have been fine if we just went directly to our location without the sandstorm and the weird follow quest with the NPC from Diablo 2. But eventually we arrive at Elias' sanctum, where he's invited other followers of Lilith and has begun to teach them to summon demons and bind them to their will. We're told that Elias has a magical device called the Sightless Eye, which lets him see anywhere in the world and across time. We eventually find Elias, we defeat him, and touch some blood petals to see a vision of Lilith, where she explains to Elias that she is not here to save Sanctuary, but to empower as many people as possible to oppose the Prime Evils, who plan to return to Sanctuary, while a monk gets eaten alive by some wolves. Elias then appears again, revealing that he is not actually dead and is clearly using magic to keep himself alive somehow. We go deeper, fight Elias a few more times, and then steal the Sightless Eye from them. When we get back, we see that someone has stabbed Mashiv, who dies soon after we return. We go back to the little church we left Thaisa at, and Laura studies the Sightless Eye. We then decide to use it to see what they're planning. We learn that Lilith is going to take her father's power, but she realizes we're spying on her and ends the connection. And that is Act 3 over. We're on to Act 4. We're to go meet Donan in Kjorvashad to deliver him a letter from Lorath, who apparently wants to seal Lilith in the Soulstone that previously had Astaroth in it. We have to go back to the Haradric Vault with Donan, who finds Nyrel in there. They bicker a little bit, and we go into Donan's side of the vault to collect some things so we can use the Soulstone on Lilith. We get a few lines from Donan about Tyrael. Apparently he left for some unknown reason, which brings up a good point. Where is he? Why isn't he here? Why is he gone? Why is there no explanation for why one of the most important characters in the game is just ignoring the most recent threat to the existence of Sanctuary? We meet back up with Lorath and Thaisa in the desert church. We talk a little, but realize Thaisa is gone. We go outside, and Elias has found us because we use the eye and finishes summoning Andariel, who we kill right away. And then we're on to Hewazar for Act 5. Wait, what? That was all of Act 4? Why not just have one less act and push these quests into the end of Act 3 or the start of Act 5? Why did it need to be that short? All I really did was teleport to Kjorvashad, the Haradric Vault, and then came back. Anyway, we meet up with Lorath, Thaisa, and Nyrel, who send us to go meet up with Donan, who asks us to go with him to prepare the Soulstone to imbue it with the essence of hatred so it can be used to seal Lilith. When we get there, Donan has some trouble and realizes that the stone is damaged and will need to repair it, and we need to go meet him in a nearby town. Here we're told to meet a witch to get the supplies that we need, and it turns out it's Thaisa, our friend from earlier. We collect the materials and Donan tries to repair the stone but fails. Thaisa tells us that she can help and brings us to a ritual site where Donan can face his grief. Donan drinks some tea that Thaisa makes. We fall asleep, Donan sees a vision of his son, and then our character wakes up with a portal from Mephisto, so we go into it. He says that if she devours me, Sanctuary is lost, which we have no reason to believe, but instead of even trying to talk to Lilith at all, We still think that she's going to destroy Sanctuary, despite being one of the few characters who said she wants to save Sanctuary. We know that Inarius doesn't give a fuck about Sanctuary, we know he just wants to go back to heaven. So we leave and go back to Thais' place, and we repair the Soulstone with Donan. Now we need to go find Nyrelle and Lorath, who have gone into the swamp to find someone called Timoe. We find her, and she tells us we need to go to the Tree of Whispers, and to open the way we need to get some incense from a town nearby. We do a dungeon, we get the incense, and we go to a nearby altar to burn the incense. When we do, we see a giant snake, and we follow it until reaching the Tree of Whispers, which is an ancient magical tree who uses severed heads to speak to us. These heads are from people who made deals with the tree, and the tree's end of the bargain always seems to be someone's head so the tree can gain the knowledge of that person. The tree tells us that Elias made a deal for the knowledge to learn how to summon Lilith, and tells us a way to find a place outside of the tree's sight, which might also be the source of his immortality. On the way, Nyrelle sneaks past a door to open it from the other side and is infected with drowned necrosis, and Lorath has to cut her arm off. This feels ham-fisted, because when we hear her scream, we just break the door down, which we could have done in the first place. I don't know why we sent Nyrelle to the other side of it, it's a derelict ship, and we're not being stealthy. So we continue alone while Lorath takes Nyrelle back to camp to treat her wounds. Down here we find a temple with some visions of Elias, who after studying some of the history of Sanctuary, came to the conclusion that Lilith is the only one willing to actually help Sanctuary. Despite that, she's still the evil guy. Anyway, it turns out Rathma kept the secret to immortality here, and Elias mastered it before leaving, which he did by binding his life essence in a finger. We take the finger, the temple floods, and we wake up in camp, having been rescued by Lorath, who then destroys the finger, ending Elias's immortality. We go back to Donan to complete the ritual to attune the Soulstone with hatred. We're attacked by Elias, we fight him and kill him for good this time, and a crow takes his head back to the Tree of Whispers. We realize Lorath went to the tree to make a deal for more information on how to find Lilith. We do not get there in time to stop him from making the deal, but he learns that the gateway to hell is in Chaldeum. And we're on to the final act, Act 6. We travel to Chaldeum where it's raining blood, and the Cathedral of Light has led an army into Chaldeum to fight the demons in the city. We fight with them to get to the Gate of Hell. We meet Inarius on the way, who steals the Worldstone from us and says that he will kill Lilith, which was a predictable outcome. Duriel, a lesser evil, is here. Down in Hell, we save Mother Prava and see the trailer cutscene of Inarius' army and Lilith fighting, but now we get to see the confrontation between Lilith and Inarius. Inarius stabs Lilith, he doesn't get taken back to heaven because the prophecy was never about him, and then Lilith kills Inarius. Donan is wounded, and then we use the eye again to see where Lilith is. But then she traps us in the vision, and she actually talks to us, and she tells us that she wants to save Sanctuary, and we can help her. But we say no because she's an evil demon who must not actually want to help Sanctuary, even though she created Sanctuary and rebelled against Hell and Mephisto. So, we accept Mephisto's help. You know, the primeval who wants to destroy Sanctuary and perpetuate the Eternal War. Yeah, that one. We'll trust him, don't worry, it's fine. When we get back, Donan is on the verge of death. He and Lorath talk about how they wish they could have stayed close, and then he dies. Nyrelle says that we should use the stone on Mephisto, which is the best option because Mephisto is worse than Lilith. Our character is surprised by this suggestion. So we imprison Mephisto and then fight Lilith, who we kill. We get back to the group and Nyrelle has gone missing, after going into a red portal with Mephisto. We leave Hell and go back to the chapel in the desert, and Nyrelle is still missing. We go outside and the Chapel of Light has immediately betrayed us. We go look for Nyrelle at the Herodric Vault where we hear Nyrelle voice lines from earlier in the game. It falls flat. We find a letter from her to Lorath that says she's run away with the Soulstone. And we let her, run away with the Soulstone with Mephisto inside of it, because this will end well. It always ends well. Just letting somebody carry around the Soulstone with a primeval in it. It's worked fine in the other Diablo games. We should just let her, a child, run off with it. Anyway, that is the end of Diablo 4's story. Okay, I want to talk about one of my biggest problems with the story that I did touch on earlier. That is how they obviously want to make the player feel more involved and engaged in the story, but never really deliver on it. We're always being told what to do next, or what the answer is. Even right at the end of the game, we were surprised that we should use the Soulstone on Mephisto. I understand that it's a video game and the story needs to be driven forward, but why can't we have any input if they want us to be talking to characters and acting like we're more important than we are? In previous Diablo titles, the story rarely asked us to engage more than listening to some lore and then killing everything between point A and point B. And that worked fine, it really did. and I'm not really sure why this game tried to go halfway with having a more engaging story. And I do get it, I really do. Certain types of games need to have different approaches to the story. Some games have branching paths where your choices change the outcome of the game, like The Witcher, and other games have the story told to you, like the other Diablo games, and MMOs are often like this as well. I think a good example of a game that does this right is Final Fantasy XIV. There are a lot of moments in that game where we as the player get a few dialogue choices to respond to characters or events that are happening, and while they never change the outcome of the story, it lets us have moments where we can put ourselves in our character's shoes and feel more engaged in the story more than we are mechanically. And in regards to the actual story itself, why was Lilith the bad guy? Like, I get it, she's a demon and she killed people, but so did Anarius and the Cathedral of Light. Like genuine torture devices and burning people alive. But at least Lilith wanted to save Sanctuary. They never really explained why we couldn't side with her at all, over anyone else. Just, nope, she's evil because demons are evil and she could never be the good guy. And like I said before, why do we let Nyrelle run off with the Soulstone with Mephisto in it? Why does anyone think this will end well? The Primevals are notorious for possessing people who come into contact with Soulstones they're sealed in, and eventually leading to them being able to get out of the Soulstone. Okay, enough about the story, let's move on to the endgame and the gameplay. For the most part, the gameplay is fun. It's fun to kill hordes of demons, getting lots of loot is fun. The skill tree system is pretty neat and offers a lot of variety. I don't really know why respecs cost gold later on, but it doesn't really matter. Leveling is a bit strange, because Diablo IV falls into an issue I find quite common with a lot of open world games, where you're kind of expected to explore the open world and do a fair bit of side content, but they give you the main plot incentive, the call to action, really early on. In Diablo IV, before we're given access to the open world, we found out that there is a grave threat to Sanctuary and we need to deal with it. I know it's different for everyone, but I personally don't really feel like helping someone clear out a cellar, a cave or something, when the world is literally about to end. And because of this disconnect between the open world design of the game and the main story, I end up underleveled for the endgame, which I could see being a common thing. I was just lucky that necromancers have a really overpowered endgame build which carried me up to world tier 4. As for gear, from pretty much the start of the game you have access to legendary aspects, which can be used to create legendary items with unique effects. It's fun to get these early and try them out to see what you'd like before the endgame. However, there are some effects that will not drop until you hit a certain level and can move on to a higher world tier. Which is a good place to start talking about world tiers. There are 4. 1 and 2 are available from the start of the game, but World Tier 2 isn't really worth playing on because the increase in experience is so negligible that the time it takes to kill monsters doesn't make it worth it. So you play on World Tier 1 until you can clear the Capstone dungeon in World Tier 2 and move on to World Tier 3. And then, once you're around level 60 to 70, you can try unlocking World Tier 4. I did this around level 58, which as I said before, I had a really overpowered build which carried me through the Capstone dungeon. Once you're in the endgame, you have a few major events that happen on a timer. World bosses, Helltides, and Legions. World bosses, which spawn on a 6-hour timer, are just a big boss that everyone kills, and then it drops loot. It's pretty fun. Helltides are an event where an entire zone gets invaded by hell, you run around and kill everything in your path and do events to collect a currency to open chests that have a decent chance of dropping legendaries. Legions are kind of the same thing but in a much smaller area and need to be completed within a certain amount of time to unlock the maximum number of chests for loot. Aside from those, the two most consistent ways of getting gear and progressing is either doing bounties for the Tree of Whispers or by doing Nightmare Dungeons. Bounties are just tasks or events you can complete in an area until you get 10 points and then you get a chest from the tree. Nightmare Dungeons work kind of similar to Keystone Dungeons from Diablo 3. Except instead of being a race to kill as many things as possible, it's just the base dungeon, but harder. Instead of a time limit, you have a death limit. You also have different affixes that change the dungeon in minor ways. This is where I realized that there are only 3 or 4 dungeon types, and they all feel like they take too long. Even with a build that had me clearing them in no time at all, the dungeons were sprawling and you always had to explore in one direction, come back, and explore the other direction as well. Ultimately, it didn't feel rewarding to complete them. In fact, it didn't really feel rewarding to do any of the content after a while. After a few Helltides, it didn't feel worth it to run around doing them. After a few world bosses, it didn't feel worth logging in just to do the world boss. Same for Legions. There's also PvP, but I didn't do any PvP because PvP in a Diablo game doesn't interest me at all, so I can't give an opinion on it. So, Diablo 4 is okay. The story has an interesting premise, but it never explores it deeper, with Lilith just ending up being the final boss for no real reason, and the gameplay loop in the endgame didn't hold my attention for long enough. Honestly, I half expect they'll do some big overhaul with the inevitable expansion, like what happened with Diablo 3, which may make the game worth the $70 price tag, but right now, I don't think it is. Hey there, so I've had to come back and record some more voiceover because while creating this video, Season 1 came out for Diablo 4, and I also have a few extra thoughts I feel I should add in since I'm recording more anyway. So first off, I stopped playing the game quite some time before Season 1 came out. The endgame didn't capture my attention all that well, and from what I've heard, Season 1 hasn't really been received well for a few reasons, like the devs decreasing player power, which sucks, especially in a Diablo game where being outrageously overpowered is one of the big draws to the game. Now call me pessimistic, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to backload player power increases into the end of the season as an attempt to keep player retention high. There's also issues with things like there being no confirmed dialogue box when buying the premium season pass, which is pretty scummy. But like I said, I stopped playing the game, so I'm sure there are plenty of other videos that go much further in depth about the recent problems in Diablo 4's Season 1. I also spent a lot of time going over and criticizing the story, and I feel like I should come back in and just say that that's because the story was one of the main draws for me in Diablo 4. They brought these two really interesting lore characters in, and I wanted to see where they went with it, and I was extremely disappointed that they seemed to fumble these stories like they have done with other Blizzard franchises. I was excited to see what they would do with Lilith and Inarius, and how they would write their story, but in retrospect, Lilith is really just another jailer or Sylvanas. I'd even argue that Inarius would have been a more compelling villain, but he just gets killed in a cutscene. We as the player get very little interaction with him at all. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. It's certainly a rough final product, but I'd rather just get it out and make sure my next project is better. And, like, subscribe, all that stuff.